This is a philosophical question about how, if we define nationalism as government in the national interest, how we would know what is in the national interest or not. It is for this reason that I propose choosing the best available guide to humanity, and thereby having access to the best available moral system. Because this best available guide to humanity is also a personal guide as well as a guide for nations and the international order, because it explains how we as individuals ought to behave towards each other and how we as nations ought to behave to other nations. And this is actually the ethical foreign policy that the late Robin Cook was talking about. So it's very simple, really. We already know that the world would be a better place if we had better politicians. And if we had better politicians, we would have better government. And why is everything going wrong in the West? It's because the worst people are in charge, and the men have turned to women. We know they have done this because they can't seem to organise so much as a piss up in a brewery. They have no principles. That means they can't focus on effective challenges to the existing order, which obviously they don't like. The existing order is matriarchy, and they can't even bring themselves to accept the reality of the situation, which is that their society is a matriarchy. A matriarchy is a society prioritizing the preferences of unmarried parents who casually conceived and parented their illegitimate children. While a patriarchy is a society prioritizing the preferences of married parents who want to properly parent their legitimate offspring. So you can see the difference in policy of the matriarchy and the patriarchy. So the matriarchy is basically just having low standards of education and morality and behavior, or patriarchy understands that we should be the best. And the best, to be our best, we have to follow certain universal and eternal rules of who we can have sex with and have children with. Lower animals understand that sex is not a joking matter, certainly not for the female of the species. Now, the arguments of feminism are easy to dismantle. After all, I've been told that I am mad and silly so many times, so assuming that I really am as mad and silly as so many people say I am, then feminists should be more than prepared to engage with me in a discussion on the merits and disbenefits of feminism, but they refuse. They don't just refuse to engage with me, they refuse to engage with anyone at all. And that proves how bankrupt and indefensible feminism is. Now, why can't nationalists challenge feminism, it is because they are morally compromised, and they, being men, they are sex addicts and addicted to the idea that fornication is a culture of the West and their human right. And of course, the reality is that it was treated as a sexual offense when the West was white. And now they don't even dare to suggest something else other than the matriarchy, which uses fornication as a carrot to keep men quiescent in their matriarchy. I've been explaining this for many years now, and the message doesn't seem to have been understood. Or perhaps it is understood, but nobody wants to talk about it. And I'm saying this is precisely the problem. And because that is the problem, it becomes obvious to me that only secular Quranism can solve it, because only secular Quranism prescribes treating unmarried parents as sex offenders, and there's no getting round that. To do that for the moral regeneration of your society, nation, and civilization. And nobody is prepared to discuss that because it is taboo. It is taboo in a matriarchy to discuss the restoration of the patriarchy. So back to my original point about the national interest. If we ourselves don't know what is in our own personal interest, and we would be invested in doing what we think is best for ourselves, and we still get it wrong, then, and we can tell that nations have got it wrong. That is why you have the fall of empires. So it's something that we should acknowledge and consider, that eventually all empires fail, and we should therefore examine the reasons why they fail. I know Edward Gibbon wrote a very long book. I don't know how many volumes he wrote about the decline and fall of Rome. But it is clear that in the fall of empires, standards of sexual morality were a factor in their fall. So we know that Rome rose when it was a patriarchy, when it had very strict rules of segregation and gender roles, and fell when they began to divorce each other without even having to inform their spouse that they were being divorced. They had no-fault divorce to an extreme degree, worse even than we had now. And the aristocracy, the Roman aristocracy, were doing it to each other. So it's pretty obvious, or it should be pretty obvious, that sexual morality is an indispensable ingredient in the success and the continuing existence of your nation. And all ancient civilizations have respected the institution of marriage, apart from the West. But then the West is not really an ancient empire, is it? Is the British Empire an ancient empire? You certainly couldn't call the American Empire an ancient empire. It only came into being in 1945, and by no stretch of the imagination can that be called ancient. And it seems that America is really doing the equivalent of a 17-year-old winning the lottery, drunk with its power. but about to destroy itself with hubris. Probably American statesmen, you can't even call them statesmen, they're really uneducated, arrogant, ignorant whippersnappers who presume to guide the ship of state, but lead it into the shallows, the rocks. So to go back to my original point, it is that even ancient civilizations do not know what is good for them, and we certainly know that we ourselves don't know what is good for us, and therefore we should seek guidance. And that is why we have certain principles of morality, because we can tell that if we allowed murder to be legal, then we would all end up being murdered. If we allowed theft to be legal, we would end up being stolen from. And if we lower standards of sexual morality, eventually we will all pay the price of it in the decline and fall of our civilization. And this is a subject that feminists who make up our matriarchy are not prepared to discuss. But the solution is simple. We just need to discuss it. More of us need to talk about the subject. Now, how are you going to discuss it in an effective way? Well, I'm afraid you will need to choose a leader to represent your interests, and this is what those who want change for the better should focus on. And you will have to choose your best representative, your best spokesman or spokeswoman. I know there's no one really prepared to step into the breach, so I shall have to volunteer my own services. After all, it was I who suggested in 2009 that we be guided by the principles contained in the Quran, because it is the best available guide to humanity, and I arrived at that conclusion as long ago as 2009 because the Quran basically supported all that I thought was necessary to fix a problem of so many years of destructive liberal policies that have created so many social problems of unmarried parents bringing up their illegitimate offspring in fatherless homes. So if that is really the problem, and I don't see how you can deny that, then the obvious solution is to reverse those policies that caused the matriarchy to be established. So if you accept that the matriarchy is built on a foundation of illegitimacy, meaning bastardy, really, then you would have to agree that the logical solution to the problem is to treat unmarried parents as sex offenders, which chapter 24, verse 2 of the Quran explicitly does. So what I am saying is that we won't really know what is good for us, but we know that civilized life depends on us following certain rules, and that this includes having a civilized international order in which civilized nations know how to behave in a civilized and honorable way. And this international order has been threatened by the degeneracy of Western nations who condone illegitimacy and refuse to acknowledge that their societies are matriarchies. Now, I am not suggesting that anyone be victimized. I have made a point of explaining the problem in historical, cultural, sociological, moral terms. I'm certainly not proposing the victimization of anyone at all. But what I am suggesting is that national and global repentance is necessary for us to consciously acknowledge that liberal democracy has been a terrible mistake, and so was 2,000 years of Christianity. And once this is acknowledged, then the problem will be solved because it will become obvious what the solution is. And that's all I wanted to say in under 70 minutes. Thank you for your attention.